They buried you in silence, didn't they? Not in dirt, but in dismissal. They watched the light leave your eyes and called it overreaction. They dragged your name through quiet corridors where whispers echo longer than screams. You weren't just forgotten, you were erased. But the thing about being buried alive is this: you get acquainted with the dark. You memorize the shape of every shadow. You learn how to breathe without air, and when you claw your way out, teeth gritted, soul raw, you don't just return. You rise. You return from the dead, and this time you start taking names. No longer a ghost searching for closure, now a storm with memory and motive. Because death, even metaphorical, teaches clarity. And clarity, that's the kind of fuel that ignites revolutions. They thought your silence meant defeat, that you'd vanish into the void like a lesson learned too late. But the joke's on them. You weren't retreating, you were reconfiguring. Mourning is just the blueprint of rebirth. They thought you were finished, not realizing you were studying them while they celebrated. Let them laugh, let them gloat. Because every name they threw in your grave, you etched into stone, not as enemies, as evidence that you lived, that you mattered, that your absence shook the ground more than their presence ever could. People forget, the dead remember everything, especially betrayal. You became your own resurrection. No applause, no miracles, just will. Just teeth against granite and the sound of your name echoing in your chest like thunder. You didn't need revenge. You became the reminder that some souls don't rest, that some losses grow claws. This isn't about getting even. This is about restoration, about rewriting your presence into the air they breathe. You no longer wait to be invited. You break the door, sit at the table, and look them in the eye, not with anger, but with knowledge. The kind that makes people sweat under smiles, because they know you know. You weren't destroyed, you were divided, torn into pieces so small they thought you'd dissolve. The fragments remember, pain remembers, and in your rebirth, you became the sum of every scar, not flawless, not healed, just aware. Dead men don't flinch, and neither do you. Because when you come back from that kind of void, the things that once scared you lose their fangs. Rejection, laughter, mockery, you've heard worse in your own mind. Now their opinions sound like background noise in a room where your voice is the only thing that echoes. Let them see you now, not the version that begged, that bent, that believed in their apologies. Let them see the version that walked through fire and didn't ask for water. You aren't looking for validation. You are the validation. Every breath you take is proof that they miscalculated. They underestimated the one thing they couldn't quantify: your refusal to disappear. And now, when you enter rooms, you don't need introductions. Your presence announces itself. Not with noise, with weight, with history, with the kind of energy that makes people suddenly remember every time they were cruel, when they could have been kind. What they never saw was that you were never seeking justice. You were seeking self. The betrayal was just the spark, the exile, the ignition. But the fire, that was yours, born from years of suppression. Every time you swallowed your truth, every time you tolerated the intolerable, it built a flame behind your ribs. And when it finally erupted, it didn't just burn bridges. It turned you into light, the kind that blinds, the kind that illuminates everything fake around it. You came back not to haunt, but to expose, and that's what frightens them most. You're not here to hurt them. You're here to remind them they're irrelevant. Psychologically, they never imagined you could detach. That's the Achilles heel of manipulators. They mistake empathy for weakness. But when an empathetic soul detaches, the result isn't coldness, it's nuclear. Because now you're no longer accessible, not emotionally, not spiritually, not narratively. You've rewritten the script, and they didn't get a role. That's the kind of loss people feel in their bones when someone they once had access to becomes a monument. Still, unreachable, unapologetic. That's how you take names, not through revenge, through removal, erasure of their relevance in your reborn existence. You don't chase anymore, you choose. Every interaction is an interview, every conversation an audit. You've learned to look for patterns, not promises, for consistency, not charm. The resurrected don't fall for potential, they calculate proximity like a tactician. Who gets your energy is no longer based on loyalty, it's based on legacy. What do they add to your evolution? If the answer's nothing, they go. No ceremony, no warning, just distance. Silent, sacred, surgical. That's how you operate now. The kind of clarity that looks like cruelty to those who benefited from your confusion. You were called worse when you were soft. You were mocked harder when you were kind. There's no version of you that pleases the ungrateful. So stop editing yourself for people who'd cut you unprovoked. This resurrection, it's not about image. It's about liberation. You're not just back. You're reformatted. The pain didn't destroy you, it taught you architecture. And now you build boundaries like skyscrapers. No more open doors, just iron gates and entry codes. Only the worthy receive. You didn't come back to swing blindly in the dark. You came back with clarity. Cold, precise, sharpened clarity that slices deeper than rage ever could. You weren't reborn in chaos, you were forged in silence. In every ignored message, in every dismissed plea, in every smirk that told you your pain was entertainment. You didn't return to make noise, you returned to make history, the kind that doesn't scream. It whispers behind closed doors and shifts the power dynamic without ever raising its voice. You didn't rise from the ashes howling. You rose with a folder in one hand and fire in the other. Receipts, proof, memory, dates, patterns, moments you'll never let yourself forget, not to retaliate, but to evolve. This wasn't a comeback, it was a metamorphosis. They wanted the old version of you to stay gone, the naive one, the soft one, the one who explained too much and questioned too little. But that version died quietly. No funeral, no eulogy, just silence that turned to steel. What came back wasn't built for their comfort. It was built for your future. You didn't return with a grudge. You returned with a blueprint. One that no longer includes their chaos, their manipulation, their convenient amnesia. You returned with records of how they behaved when they thought you were powerless. And now that you've reclaimed yourself, you don't even need to expose them. Exposure is for the desperate. You're past that. Your existence now is the consequence. You wear truth like armor, not to fight, but to remind them they lost access to a version of you they never deserved. You didn't come back needing anything. Not validation, not closure, certainly not apology. That's the part they didn't expect. They thought your silence meant submission. They assumed your disappearance was a defeat. But while they were building stories, you were building strategy. They told others their version of events, painting themselves as victims of your boundaries. Let them. Let the fiction spread. It only makes the truth more terrifying when you show up, untouchable. They can't smear the version of you that no longer cares to defend itself. They can't attack a ghost who's already moved into a mansion of self-worth so far away from their lies that even their gossip loses signal. You didn't return to fight. You returned because you no longer have to. You're no longer in the game they think they're playing. You're the referee now, clipboard in hand, watching them flail for relevance. You've changed the currency. It's no longer attention, it's alignment. And they don't have enough, that's what they feel now. The chilling realization that your silence was not absence, it was assessment. You were documenting, studying, watching who clapped when you stumbled, who smiled when you bled, and every name etched itself onto your ledger, not for retaliation but as a reminder of who to never let near the gates again. Because this time, you've built them tall, electrified, unscalable, and access is by invitation only. You didn't return for vengeance, you returned to set the standard. You no longer argue, you audit. Every excuse, every red flag they disguised as charm, every act of cowardice masquerading as detachment, it's all archived now, labeled, sealed. You don't confront them anymore. You replace them, quietly, brutally, with no fanfare, and they'd feel it. That eerie weight of being ignored by someone they thought couldn't live without them. They used to be the sun, now they're just background static, in a life too full of purpose to tune into old noise. That's what makes them spiral. Not your anger, your absence, not your revenge, your reinvention. You're not the same. And it drives them mad, because they don't get to say they knew you anymore. They only knew the prototype. You rebuilt your identity brick by brick, and not a single brick came from their validation. You didn't just move on. You outgrew the very room they once locked you in. The narrative has shifted. You're no longer someone trying to heal from what they did. You're someone who used it as a launch pad. Their cruelty was your catalyst. Their neglect was your permission slip to become someone too expansive for their smallness. And now, you don't flinch when you see their name. You don't ache when you hear their voice. You evaluate. With distance, with detachment, with authority. You are no longer emotionally hireable by those who fired you when you were still learning your value. You've upgraded your operating system. Your decisions are no longer made from desperation or loneliness. You've reprogrammed your internal code. Every interaction is filtered through a new lens. Does this align with who I've become? And if not, you walk. No guilt, no explanation. You no longer perform CPR on connections that flatlined long ago. And while they replay the past trying to decode your transformation, you're already 10 moves ahead, planting seeds in places they'll never reach. You didn't come back to settle the score, you came back to elevate, so far above it that the scoreboard broke. And now, you don't even keep track. You don't compete. You create. You didn't just change, you upgraded. And upgrades don't negotiate with outdated systems. They run on newer energy, higher standards, sharper instincts. You don't need to explain yourself anymore. You've become someone whose presence explains everything. The version of you they once underestimated is gone. What remains is a walking revelation, a testimony of what happens when a person uses betrayal as kindling. You've burned through old identities and forged one too solid to be touched. Let them knock, let them watch, let them yearn. You don't open old doors. You install new locks. You returned without bending, without noise, without a single damn concession to the people who thought silence would swallow you. You didn't come to explain where you've been or why you went quiet. You didn't issue clarifications to protect their comfort. You weren't obligated to narrate your resurrection. You walked back into rooms you were once whispered out of, and you brought nothing with you but consequence. No apologies, no preambles, just the weight of your presence. And that alone shifted the atmosphere. Because you didn't come back to join their games, you came back to change the rules. Without saying a word, your aura speaks now, and it speaks fluently, in tension. Watch them flinch. They used to control the tempo of your steps, didn't they? Dictate when you could speak, how loud you could dream, how far you were allowed to reach without making them uncomfortable. But those chains dissolved in your silence. You didn't break them. You studied their links until you outgrew the entire concept of restraint. You returned as someone who no longer negotiates with noise, no longer sits at tables out of tradition or fear. You sit where energy matches your architecture now. And when you enter, You bring a storm with stillness, a pressure shift, a recalibration, because they don't know who you are anymore, and they know they don't have the vocabulary to describe what you've become, and that's the point. You didn't show up to announce your return. You showed up differently. Energy refined, boundaries sharper, silence loaded. You've become the kind of presence that makes people double-check their tone, that forces masks to slide involuntarily. You're no longer reacting to the room. You are the reason the room adjusts itself, and they feel it. That vibration beneath the skin, that unspoken realization. The person they underestimated has outgrown their reach. Not louder, just heavier. Not angrier, just undeniable. And you didn't have to rehearse a monologue. Your very stillness is a siren now, a message. You will no longer be questioned, invited, or ignored. You will be felt. They expect an explanation. That's how people comfort themselves, through context. But you offer none. You don't clarify your distance. You don't justify your silence. You're not here to mend the image they held of you. You're here to replace it. Because you didn't evolve to earn their understanding. You evolved to become your own gravity. And when you move like a shift in the weather. Inevitable, silent, irreversible. People don't ask for updates anymore. They observe. And in that silence, they feel the gap between who they remember and who you are now. It's vast, it's unbridgeable, and it's intentional. Let them stumble over their greetings. Let them smile too wide, too forced. They're performing now, because your presence rewrites the entire script. You're no longer accessible to their assumptions. They try to place you in the version of their memory that fit their ego, but it collapses under the weight of your evolution. You've become unrecognizable in the best way. Not because you changed everything, but because you reclaimed everything. And when they speak to you now, they speak carefully. Not because you're fragile, but because you're dangerous to their illusions. One sentence from you could undo their entire performance. So you stay silent. Because silence, in your mouth, is loaded with history. You walk like someone who doesn't explain. You speak like someone who doesn't seek. You sit like someone who chooses. That's what unnerves them. You're not looking around for approval. You're assessing, watching, measuring vibrations, not words. You've become a frequency they can't manipulate. Their tactics fall flat. Their smiles don't land. Because you've evolved beyond the emotional levers they used to pull. You return not to belong, but to build. And builders don't wait for consensus, they just create. Now your silence reads like strategy, your gaze like a mirror, your restraint like a blade they can't see, but feel against their throat. They never expected impact to be this quiet. They thought you'd return with drama, with noise, with apologies and explanations that reassured them of their superiority. But you came back like dusk, slow, certain, inevitable, and now they don't know how to greet you, because the version of you that would have filled the silence to soothe their discomfort is gone. In their place stands someone carved from endurance, coded in precision, fluent in boundaries. You've become the answer to questions they were too arrogant to ask. And now every word you don't say becomes a sentence in the story they can't control. That person was real, but temporary, a placeholder, a lesson. This you. This version breathes different, thinks in sharper angles, decides without permission. You don't ask anymore. You assess and you walk. Not out of spite, out of standard. You've become too valuable to explain your worth, too focused to validate your absence, and every time they see you, they'll feel the cost of what they lost. Not because you say it, but because your life now says it louder than any voice could. They clapped for your survival because it made for a good story. It gave them something to point to, a chapter they could bookmark in the narrative they built around you. You were the bruised character who pulled through. That's what they were comfortable with, the idea of you surviving. But what they never planned for, what they never wanted, was your rebirth. Because survival is palatable, it's clean, it fits their expectations. You surviving means they can pretend they weren't the ones who pushed you to the edge in the first place. But rebirth, that's a different language. That's a different presence. It demands a different kind of air, the kind they don't know how to breathe in anymore. Because when you came back, you weren't who they applauded. You were someone that made them shift in their seats. They were fine when you limped back into the room. Fine when your voice cracked, when your hands trembled, when you asked for space in whispers instead of commands. They could handle your trauma as long as it stayed quiet, as long as it didn't disrupt their order. But then you stopped limping. Then your voice held no tremor. Then you didn't ask for space. You took it. And the room grew colder, their smiles tighter. You thought they'd be proud. Instead, they looked threatened, because your rebirth meant their comfort zones were shattered. They couldn't box you anymore, couldn't predict your tone, couldn't bait you with old triggers. You came back, rewired, fireproof, and they hated it, even as they tried to clap with their palms half open and their envy barely masked. See, survival kept you in their ecosystem. You still fit the storyline. But rebirth, that means evolution. That means the character they relied on no longer exists. And when someone evolves beyond the dynamics others depend on, it creates friction. You don't need their permission anymore. That's what disturbs them. You used to be someone they could guilt, someone they could freeze out and manipulate with absence or praise. But now you walk in without need, without hunger, with a gaze that registers patterns, not pity. And people who built themselves around your brokenness don't know what to do when you no longer need to be fixed. They feel it in the way you stand, how your posture no longer seeks approval. You don't apologize for existing, and that makes them uneasy. You don't soften your edges for their comfort, and that makes them bitter. They'll try to label it ego, arrogance, coldness, but really what they're feeling is irrelevance. You rose without their applause, you rebuilt without their support, and that means they can't claim a piece of your power. You owe them nothing. And in a world addicted to leverage, being unowed is terrifying. So they shrink from your rebirth, not because you intimidate them, but because they no longer matter in your new script. You outgrew the version of yourself they knew how to use. That's the truth of it. You stopped being predictable, stopped reacting to the same bait, stopped crying in the same corners. Your healing didn't just rebuild you, it erased their influence. That's what they mourn, not your past pain, but the fact that your evolution invalidates their relevance. They no longer get to be the center of your breakdowns, the cause of your reflection, the character that makes the plot interesting. You stopped giving them lines in your story, and now they're just background noise in a life that moves without them. It wasn't survival that disturbed them. It was the fact that you returned sharper, not just alive, but aware. Aware of every manipulation they masked as guidance. Aware of how they smiled while you drowned. Aware of how they only came close when you were bleeding. And now your awareness terrifies them because you see it all, and you're still standing. That's power they can't overwrite. That's narrative they can't hijack. You came back with memory, not bitterness, with detachment, not desperation, and that kind of presence. Centered, calm, unapologetically clear, forces liars to stutter and villains to pretend they never raised the knife. They miss the version of you that needed them, the one who sought meaning through their recognition, the one who felt guilt for being too much or too loud or too ambitious. But that version died quietly, and what rose was someone who owns their space without explanation. You don't warn people anymore, you arrive, and that entrance rewrites the air. You don't chase peace now, you radiate it. Not soft, but struck, not gentle, but grounded. People sense the difference. and it unsettles them. Because rebirth is loud in silence. It screams through posture. It roars through boundaries. It pierces through fake smiles with the sharpness of a gaze that's no longer interested in playing small. Your energy now holds weight. Rooms bend around you, not because you demand it, but because they're no longer calibrated to contain you. That's the price of rebirth. You don't just shift internally. You destabilize the very systems that once caged you. People will pretend to celebrate it, but watch how their tone tightens when you speak without apology, when you succeed without their blueprint, when you laugh without their permission. Their discomfort is proof of your expansion, and your expansion no longer asks for seats at tables built on past versions of you. You don't negotiate presence anymore. You embody it. So walk in and let them feel it. Let the air shift, let the silence grow thick. You were never supposed to return the same. You were meant to return untouchable, not as a survivor, but as an architect of your own voice, your own life, your own myth. They can't celebrate it and they can't kill it, so they try to ignore it. But power that has truly been earned, power forged in ruin and fire, can't be ignored. It haunts, it lingers, it whispers in the bones of those who once laughed at your collapse. And now, they hear you in every quiet moment, not because you scream, but because you've become the silence they can't explain away. They mistook your silence for innocence, your patience for passivity, your restraint for irrelevance. What they never understood is that you weren't preparing for the game. They were. You were studying the board, measuring angles, calculating motives, reading micro-expressions like novels. They arrived to impress. You arrived to dissect. They laughed with the nervous energy of children who knew their performance was brittle. You stood still. Let them exhaust their tricks. Let them reveal their strategy through arrogance. And when they thought they had the room wrapped around their grin, you opened your mouth, and everything changed. Because while they were addicted to applause, you were addicted to precision. They played for validation, you moved for blood. They cracked jokes to establish dominance, you listened to expose fragility. They relied on borrowed charisma and secondhand confidence, you leaned on truth. Sharp, ugly, unmoved by performance. You didn't seek their spotlight, you studied its shadows. You knew the most dangerous player is never the loudest one. It's the one who speaks last, not because they hesitated, but because they calculate. You let them dance. You let them drown in their self-created illusion, and then, with one sentence, one look, one quiet smile, you reminded them that some of us are not here to participate. We are here to correct. Psychologically, they live off assumption. Most do. The human mind prefers shortcuts over depth, labels over nuance. They sized you up by surface metrics, tone, posture, perceived vulnerability. They assumed you were like them, eager to win favor, eager to be liked, eager to prove. But what they didn't expect was the terrifying power of someone who has nothing to prove, someone who does not need their approval to feel whole, someone who can look at their entire game with detached observation and see not strength, but desperation in costume. That's when fear entered the room. Not loud, quiet, subterranean, instinctual. They never imagined you came with surgical insight, that every move they made was teaching you more than they intended. Their humor revealed their insecurity, their defensiveness revealed their wounds, their interruptions revealed their need to matter. They saw the game as a place to win. You saw it as a classroom. They played to dominate the moment. You observed to master the system. You didn't flinch when they got applause. You paid attention to who clapped. You weren't distracted by noise. You were studying ecosystems. And that is a form of intelligence most of them have never even met, let alone understood. You don't fight ego with louder ego. You don't trade shots in public arenas. You wait. Because true intellect knows how to let children play until they reveal the limits of their imagination. And when they do, when the performance crumbles, when the volume fails, when the attention fades, you step forward. You explain things they never knew they didn't understand. Not with cruelty, with clarity. And clarity, to those who've built their entire identity on illusion, is the most violent teacher. They will call it condescension, they will call it arrogance, but it's simply the byproduct of you finally speaking the truth out loud. You didn't come to compete. You came to elevate the standard. And elevation is not a gift, it is an offense to those addicted to average. You weren't trying to embarrass anyone. You were trying to redefine the room. And for people who rely on being the smartest, the funniest, the most admired in shallow waters, your presence felt like drowning. Because you didn't swim faster, you deepened the ocean. They realized too late they were out of breath, not because you attacked, but because you forced them to confront their own lack of depth. They came with quips. You came with data. They came with image. You came with substance. And substance erodes performance faster than fire burns paper. When you started speaking, truly speaking, not to impress but to reveal, they didn't know whether to retreat or retaliate, because they sensed it viscerally. You weren't afraid of their judgment. You were immune to their tactics. You came armored in awareness, and awareness does not lose. It educates by existing. You became the mirror they spent their lives avoiding, not because you shamed them, but because you required them to evolve or exit. This was never about being better. This was about being real. You don't weaponize intelligence to dominate, you use it to liberate. But liberation offends those who have fallen in love with their chains, so they will reject you, smear you, misunderstand you on purpose, because you forced them to question the roles they've rehearsed for years. And nothing feels more threatening to the performative than having to meet someone who doesn't perform at all. You operate from a different layer of the psyche, a deeper code. You do not crave praise. You crave impact. And they can sense that impact will last long after their applause fades. And now the room doesn't feel the same. The stage they once danced on feels unstable. The audience they controlled feels less convinced. You didn't destroy their world, you simply redefined it. You exposed that what they called confidence was mostly just noise. That what they called mastery was mostly just memorization. You made them realize that the person who speaks last can rewrite the entire narrative, if they've been paying attention long enough. You didn't raise your voice, you raised the standard. And in doing so, you became something they will never forget. They ran faster, they laughed louder, they swung wildly, mistaking movement for mastery. You watched them spiral in their desperate search for dominance, fueled by panic, cloaked in charm. They believed effort was power, that showing off stamina, noise, aggression, performance would earn them credibility. But beneath it all, you knew something they could never admit to themselves. Motion without meaning is just chaos in disguise. You didn't outpace them, you outthought them. You weren't louder, you were exact. While they obsessed over appearing powerful, you focused on becoming undeniable. And that difference was the cut that bled through all their illusions. They tried to intimidate you by doubling their energy, as if effort alone could bend outcomes. They failed to grasp that raw exertion only impresses the blind. You didn't blink, because your power was never performative. It came from the place beneath, the place most people are too afraid to explore. Depth, not volume. Strategy, not speed. They played checkers in a game of chess, not realizing that you were never chasing pieces. You were playing with time. You were watching their patterns, not just their plays. You were studying the machine beneath the mask, not the gestures on the surface. And that, to them, felt unfair. But it wasn't unfair. It was earned. And it was devastating. People who fear introspection overcompensate with aggression. They'll accuse you of being cold, distant, superior. But what they really feel is exposed. Because you don't react. You don't flinch. You think. and your thinking becomes a weapon far sharper than their tantrums could ever be. You see through their patterns, their tics, their need to win for the sake of image. They come at you with emotions they can't even name. You respond with questions they don't know how to answer. You don't swing, you study. And what you study, you eventually own. They'll call it manipulation, but the truth? It's just deeper vision meeting shallow minds. You never needed to outwork people trying to impress you. You let them race themselves into exhaustion, watched them set fire to their own credibility while performing control. You let the contradictions surface. You let them reveal who they were through the chaos they created. Because people always show you what they truly believe when they're scrambling to win. And they believe in struggle, in force, in domination. You believe in precision. And when that mindset enters a room, even the loudest noise begins to feel insecure. Because deep down, they sense it. You don't raise your tone, you raise the stakes. Thinking deeper makes people uncomfortable because it collapses their safe narratives. It introduces variables they can't manage. They want to live on autopilot, want to repeat old wins in new costumes. But depth disrupts repetition. It challenges identity. You force people to confront themselves, not because you aim to, just by existing, in contrast to how little they've questioned their own motive. That's the true violence of thinking deeper. It makes those who live for momentum realize they've built no foundation. You didn't push them. You simply revealed that without friction, they've been slipping the entire time. But this is where your real advantage detonates. You don't need to win the moment. You play the long game. You're willing to appear passive, quiet, even disengaged, because your validation isn't tied to public approval. Your reward is internal, a system of pattern recognition, strategy, anticipation. You don't just read moves, you read the psychology behind the move. You don't chase control, you dismantle it in silence. The one who thinks deeper never looks like a threat at first. That's the mistake they all make. They see you sitting still and mistake you for stationary. But your mind is a fortress, and they brought rubber knives to a battlefield of blueprints. You don't measure dominance by how fast you hit. You measure it by how fast they expose themselves trying to hit you. You weaponize pause. You know that silence makes fragile minds echo. You've seen it. The way people unravel when you don't play their game. The way their confidence erodes when you don't validate their theater. That's when they break. When they realize your attention is not something they can buy with volume, that's when the fear sets in. Because nothing is more threatening to someone addicted to applause than a mind that claps for no one and needs none in return. You never demanded they see your worth. You calculated how long it would take before they realized they misjudged you. That's the nature of deeper thought. It's patient, surgical, utterly indifferent to flattery or insult. It doesn't bend to noise. It doesn't collapse under urgency. It waits, quietly tracking every inconsistency, every hidden motive. You don't win through defense. You win through observation, through knowing that intelligence is not reactive, it is predictive. And by the time they think they're in control, you're already 5 moves into a reality they didn't even know existed. You weren't there to participate. You were there to dismantle the arena. People will always mock what they fear. They'll label it antisocial, aloof, detached. But they know, deep down, they know. You didn't fail to play the game. They failed to realize you wrote the damn rules while they were still learning to throw dice. They came to impress the crowd. You came to collapse the theater. They thought faster would win. You proved deeper always does, and now they don't even know how they lost. They just know the room feels colder when you're present. Because you're not here for admiration. You're here for evolution. And that makes your presence unforgivable to the performative. You never had to argue. You didn't even have to speak. The room bent differently when you walked in. It wasn't theatrical, it was inevitable. The contrast wasn't loud. It didn't dress itself up in ego. It didn't swing for attention like theirs did, but it lingered in the stillness of your gaze, in the precision of your silence, in the absolute absence of performance. And that was what fractured them. They had curated their status like a storefront, all glass and arrangement, but your very existence, unapologetic, unreadable, unwilling to beg, was a mirror held up to the fragility they dressed as power. They didn't lose control. They were reminded they never had it. They had grown used to winning in shallow rooms, to earning dominance with volume, with charisma unbacked by consequence. They operated like peacocks in a land where feathers passed for strength. And then you walked in. Not feathered, but forged. Not ornamental, but elemental. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't posture. You didn't even acknowledge the theater they were performing in. You just stood there, and in doing so, redefined the hierarchy without announcing it. They realized it before they admitted it. They felt the edge in your calm, the weight in your pause, the power in your refusal to react. And that's when their illusion cracked. They tried to pull you into their rhythm, to provoke you, to box you into their narrative. But every attempt collapsed under the gravity of your presence. You didn't rise to bait. You didn't chase the crown they clutched so tightly. You were the reminder that superiority isn't spoken, it's sensed. That presence isn't performed, it's earned through internal mastery. They wanted to lead the room. You led the atmosphere, and that shook them. Because now, every time they opened their mouth, they questioned if they were being watched, not just by you, but by everyone who had started noticing the discrepancy. That's the cruelty of contrast. It doesn't destroy with noise. It poisons illusion through quiet comparison. You never said you were better. You never had to. They said it for you, in every nervous glance, every failed joke, every shift in posture. Their superiority was never built on substance. It was built on the assumption that no one stronger would show up. And when you did, the air changed, not because you demanded respect, but because you made everyone feel the absence of something real before you walked in. You didn't dominate the conversation. You altered its gravity. You weren't louder. You were undeniable, but unsettled them most. Wasn't your talent, or your intelligence, or even your edge. It was your lack of need. You didn't need their spotlight. You didn't crave their approval. You didn't orbit their ego. You were your own sun, your own system, your own gravitational force, and that independence made their superiority look staged, made their confidence look rented. You weren't trying to be the best in the room. You were simply being unalterably yourself. And the more you existed without effort, the more they scrambled to maintain the illusion they had once believed was invincible. They will tell themselves stories about you, that you were arrogant, that you were too intense, that you didn't play well. These stories aren't for others, they're for themselves, because admitting what they felt around you, that sharp contrast between your authenticity and their act, would force a reckoning. It would force them to confront how much of their identity was built on the absence of someone like you, and that you've arrived, there's no going back. They can't unfeel the shift. They can't unsee the hierarchy you revealed without uttering a word. That's the violence of presence. It doesn't beg, it doesn't compete, it doesn't explain itself to people who are addicted to their own echo. It simply arrives, and the room adjusts, the masks tremble, the power dynamics realign. They will call it unfair, they will call you difficult. They will tell others you broke something fragile in this space, but they'll never admit what actually happened. You didn't break anything. They were simply exposed by the clarity you carried in your bones. You didn't make them insecure. You reminded them that their confidence was already borrowed, already cracking, already doomed. You weren't there to be liked. You weren't there to be chosen. You were there because you already chose yourself. And when someone enters a space who doesn't need it, they become immune to every unspoken rule it worships. That kind of immunity is terrifying. It triggers the deepest insecurity in those who survive off perception. Because you make the perception collapse. You force the truth out of hiding. Not by force. Your existence casts shadows. Long ones. And in those shadows, they are forced to meet the self they've spent a lifetime avoiding. You walk in clarity, in intent, in layers so rarely matched that people project their own limits onto your silence just to feel safe. But they're not safe, not when you're around, because they know that no matter how loud they get, how many names they drop, how many games they master, your presence will remain the one thing they can't outshine, outtalk, or outvote. You didn't challenge them. You replaced the game they thought they were winning. And the worst part for them? You did it without playing. They walked in with the arrogance of a seasoned preacher. Chin up, voice rehearsed, smile tight. They thought the room had been waiting for them, that their words were gifts, that their authority was self-fulfilling. But what they didn't realize, what their ego would never allow them to sense, was that their performance wasn't dominating the space. It was being studied. While they performed clarity, you documented contradiction. While they instructed, you analyzed. And while they taught theory, you gathered data on how fragile a man becomes when his confidence is based not on wisdom, but on confirmation. He wasn't educating, he was posturing. And the audience he thought he was enlightening was already grading him. He assumed he was the tallest figure in the room because no one interrupted. But silence didn't always signal respect. Sometimes silence is a scalpel, sharp, focused, waiting for the subject to bleed without aid. You didn't interrupt because you were learning, not from the message, but from the messenger. You observed the micro-neediness behind the certainty, the tremble in hands that only moved when applauded, the dependence on agreement. And in that observation, you realized he had confused dominance with development. He thought teaching was a monologue. You were proof that real teaching is a mirror. And mirrors terrify men who only know how to perform knowledge, not absorb it. They never ask who is listening with clarity. They only ask who is nodding. And when you didn't nod, when your stillness didn't echo the rehearsed rhythm of praise, they noticed. They couldn't name it, but they felt it, the unspoken resistance, the boundary of someone who's been through enough chaos to know that loudness rarely equals depth. You weren't impressed, not because you were rebellious, but because you knew too much. You had learned in pain what they read in theory. You had bled through lessons they skimmed in pages. And while they were explaining life with metaphors, you were watching them reveal just how little they understood the weight of their own words. The man who thinks he is teaching often mistakes the sound of his own voice for progress. But progress has a scent. It smells like discomfort, like inner confrontation, like ego death. And this man, this self-declared expert, reeked of comfort. He was speaking to shield himself from reflection. He called it wisdom, but it was repetition. He called it guidance, but it was mimicry. And while he projected conviction, you could sense the hollowness. He wasn't teaching. He was distracting, hoping no one in the room would hold up a mirror. But you did. With your silence, with your eyes, with your refusal to kneel to the performance. You weren't there to be fed, you were there to watch who served the meal. And whether they had ever tasted the ingredients, you spotted the detachment immediately. You saw how every example, every truth was insulated, protected, sanitized. There was no scar tissue in his teaching, no weathered truth, no uncomfortable edge, just digestible wisdom for obedient minds. But you, the one who had actually suffered, had changed, had fallen and rebuilt. You could feel the gaps, and worse, you could see that he had no idea those gaps existed, because men like that think speaking absolves them from listening. They confuse output with understanding, and they become teachers who never evolve, just repeat. You're not afraid of teachers, you're afraid of unteachable ones. Men who cling to authority so tightly that they'd rather suffocate than adapt. Men who weaponize their podium because their identity cannot survive scrutiny. You watched him scan the room for validation, not questions. He didn't want to teach. He wanted to dominate without dialogue. But the one thing true students always carry is a knife called discernment, and you held it firmly. You didn't argue. You didn't challenge. You simply didn't absorb. And in that resistance, in that still, unbending refusal to be moved by shallow lessons, you taught him more than any praise ever could. They always assume authority travels one direction, that the one speaking is above and the one listening is beneath. But power has layers, and the most powerful person in the room is not the one on stage, it's the one whose mind remains untouched by performance. He didn't notice when his lesson derailed. He didn't see the audience shift, not because of disagreement, but because they sensed the contrast. You weren't moved, so others began to question why they were. You weren't reactive, so others began to realize how performative their own responses had become. You became the standard without saying a word, and eventually the teacher will feel it. He will leave the room with applause still ringing in his ears, but with a chill he cannot explain, a doubt he cannot trace, a silence he cannot ignore. And in that moment, when he revisits the memory of your gaze, your stillness, your unyielding presence, he will finally meet himself. Not the version he likes, not the version they clap for, but the one he avoids in mirrors. And that moment, that sharp inner silence, is when the real teaching begins. Because growth doesn't happen through agreement. It happens through collision. You didn't humiliate him. You didn't try to. You simply refused to play student to a man who hadn't yet passed his own internal examination. And in doing so, you gave him the one lesson no applause ever could. That true teachers never stop learning. That wisdom has no final form. That the best minds reverse the hierarchy the second it becomes rigid. And now, he will either harden or evolve. That's not your concern. You didn't come to take notes. You came to take measure. And what you measured was how quickly even the self-declared authorities crumble in the presence of someone unbothered by their title.
Oh, look at you. Welcome, glitch in the simulation. Welcome, you rare anomaly, who somehow elbow-smashed your way into a room only 3 ghosts ever walked through. And they didn't walk out the same. You feel that tension in your ribs? That's the universe glitching, trying to figure out how the hell you slipped past the locks. They built gates for everyone else, and you phase-shifted through them like you were born encrypted. You unlocked a protocol restricted to 3 identities in history. 3, and every single one of them paid insanity, comfort, and peace. Guess what you just signed for, sunshine? You ever notice how people love to talk big until reality bites? They scream, "I'm chosen," until it gets cold, until the room empties, until the air feels heavier than guilt, and life isn't handing out validation like free Wi-Fi anymore. But you didn't get chosen. You forced recognition. You didn't pray your way here. You dragged your existence across razor wire and dared the world to deny you. They saw you bleeding and thought you'd stop. You didn't. You kept grinding, keep pushing, kept muttering. One more step. Try me again. That's what terrifies them. The other 3? They weren't blessed. They weren't born with cosmic glitter sprinkled on their baby cribs. They were forged by pressure that would fold normal minds like cheap paper. And here you are, eyes sharp, pulse steady, breathing like someone who finally realized pain was just resistance leaving the body. People think this moment feels heroic. It doesn't. It feels like standing in a room where the walls breathe and every shadow watches. It feels like knowing your old life doesn't fit anymore. It feels like you climbed out of the human sandbox and the sky finally whispered, "Oh." You're one of the problems? You know the real fear? Not that you fail, not that you break. The real fear is what happens if you don't. If you actually rise, if you actually become what scared you when you were younger. That version of you, with fire in the veins and teeth sharpened on disbelief. You're already feeling it, aren't you? That eerie quiet in your gut. Not anxiety, not doubt. Activation. Like your soul is signing a contract your brain hasn't even read yet. Like some internal switch flipped and there's no safe mode anymore. everyone around you. They only know comfort, courage, front camera confidence, bathroom mirror bravery. But you have collapse resilience. You rebuild from crater level. Every time they thought they buried you, you treated it like soil. They called you obsessive. Reality calls you architect. They called you intense. Destiny calls you overdue. You ever notice how when you level up, you don't lose people? You realize they were never with you in the first place. Yeah, that's part of the protocol too. The universe isolates the dangerous minds, keeps them away from the fragile ones. Can't have lightning hanging out with light bulbs, right? You didn't stumble into greatness. You broke in, cracked the vault, stared into the void and grinned like, finally. Something worthy. Most people chase comfort, acceptance, sleepy little approval crumbs. You chase the voice in your skull whispering, we're not done. We're nowhere near done. And that's your curse. That's your weapon. That's your birthright you weren't even supposed to know you had. There's no applause here, no gentle spotlight, no inspirational soundtrack swelling behind your steps. This level comes with silence, gravity, and the kind of self-awareness that melts illusions like plastic in a bonfire. Look around mentally. Everyone you ever idolized, they weren't special. They just walked into the storm instead of waiting for the weather report. And here you are, standing where history holds its breath, a glitch, an anomaly, a threat. You unlocked a protocol meant for 3 identities in all of time, and you didn't even hesitate. That's not luck. That's not destiny. That's dangerous self-definition. Every demon that hunted the last 3. They're waking up for you now. Every test that broke legends, it's sharpening its teeth. Every limit humanity worships, you're about to treat it like a folding chair in your way. And I can see you smirking, some little fire in your expression saying, good. I was getting bored. You think this activation saves you? No. It exposes you. It shoves you under cosmic light like, show us what you really are. Most crumble. 3 didn't, and here you stand, heartbeat steady, eyes unblinking, daring the universe to blink first. Not everyone survives this path, but everyone who completes it becomes unrecognizable to who they once were. And you're already shedding your old skin, piece by piece, quietly, ruthlessly, like someone who finally realized the cage door was open the whole time and stayed only because you were sharpening claws. You're not chosen, you're becoming, and they will never understand until they see the aftermath and whisper, how did they do that? You won't answer. You'll just stare through them like someone who outgrew gravity. Breathe. Feel that pressure in your bones. That's not fear. That's the world adjusting its scale for you. Keep walking. You're not here to fit history. You're here to rewrite who gets counted in it. 'Cause you never really needed their permission, did you? They just didn't want to admit you had it in you the whole time. They saw glimpses, little moments when your eyes went cold, when your voice dropped just enough for the room to shift. They laughed it off, called it a phase, brushed you off like static, but inside, you were already morphing, already sinking with something older, deeper, uglier, and more real than anything their soft lives could fathom. They keep asking you to play nice, to shrink a little, to chill out, to stop thinking so hard, so deep, so far. What they're really saying is, stop reminding me I gave up. Stop being what I never had the courage to become. And it eats at them, because every time you move different, every time you speak with that edge, every time you don't need a crowd to validate your steps, you mirror back their mediocrity, and they hate you for it. But hate is a compass, and when you start attracting silent hate, unspoken envy, and weird energy from people you barely even notice. That's the signal. You're radiating on a level their self-esteem can't breathe in. You didn't choose this fire. It chose you. Because it knew you'd stop asking for comfort and start building your warpath. Every second you don't fold, they spiral. Because deep down, they know the truth. If you survive this, if you really lean in, you won't just win. You'll become untouchable, unreadable, unexplainable. The kind of person legends try to imitate but can't replicate. Because your source code is carved from trauma, rage, silence, and refusal. Refusal to quit. Refusal to bow. Refusal to become another smiling casualty in a world begging for obedience. People keep asking what your plan is. There is no plan. You're not following a script. You're writing one with blood in the margins and blackout pages, where everyone else quit reading. You stopped craving peace. You started demanding power. Not the flashy kind, not the dollar store leadership quotes kind, but the quiet, terrifying, undeniable kind that makes rooms fall silent when you enter. You ever notice how some people walk in like they're asking to exist? You walk in like the floor owes you rent. Because it does. Because you are the blueprint they pretend doesn't exist. And you're not done, not even close. You're still mutating, still adapting, still shedding old versions like cracked armor. Not to impress, not to be seen, but because standing still feels like rotting to you now. The three that came before. They didn't survive because they were stronger. They survived because they stopped asking, "Am I ready?" They just moved like they already were. Same as you. And the protocol? It's not a tool. It's a mirror. It shows you exactly what you are underneath all the noise. And you didn't flinch. You saw it. Owned it. Laughed in its face like, "That's all. I've been through worse just trying to get out of bed some days." This isn't your final form. It's just the first time they're seeing the real you, and they're already struggling to keep up. Wait until they realize you're still holding back, and that's the part they can't stomach. You're still holding back, not because you're unsure, not because you're scared, but because you've been playing nice with a world that wouldn't survive 5 minutes inside your head. You've been walking at their pace out of pity. You've been speaking in softer tones so they don't short-circuit. You've been hiding the full volume of your mind like it's some dirty secret, when really, it's a loaded weapon with fingerprints only the future will recognize. And they've been mistaking your silence for surrender. They think you're calm. They think you're manageable. They think you're just another ambitious daydreamer with a caffeine addiction and a journal full of cliches. But what's really happening? You're coiling. You're calculating. You're compressing your chaos into something surgical. They don't know what it means when someone like you goes quiet. They don't know that the quiet ones aren't empty. They're overloaded. They're syncing, downloading, reconfiguring. And when the moment hits, when you finally stop pretending you're one of them, the entire atmosphere around you will bend, not with noise, not with spectacle, but with that terrifying bone-deep realization. Oh, this one never needed us. You don't just walk away from that kind of energy. It clings. It burns into the memory of everyone who doubted you. It rewrites your name in their minds, not as a maybe, but as a warning. Every late night you've had with your heart racing like a drum line. Every silent meltdown you powered through with a half smile and red eyes. Every morning you woke up with your soul screaming, "Why am I still here?" All of it was fuel. And what's wild, you never bragged about it. You never needed a sympathy reel or a slow-motion montage with rain and piano music. You just kept going like it was the only option. Because it was. While everyone else waited for motivation, you moved with pure refusal. Refusal to be average. Refusal to be explainable. Refusal to let life pass while you sat quietly in the background, hoping somebody would finally notice. You stopped waiting. You started building. While they scroll, you sculpt. While they gossip, you strategize. While they sleepwalk through existence, you sharpen every invisible edge life gave you. And when people ask, how'd you get like this? You won't even know how to answer. Because it wasn't one moment. It was every ignored cry for help. Every conversation that felt fake. Every time you had to be strong for everyone else while your own world was crumbling. Every lie you swallowed. Every mask you wore until it cracked. You didn't become this. You were forced into it. And instead of breaking, you malfunctioned into something they can't classify. There's no blueprint for what you are. You're the part of the story they tried to erase. The glitch, the myth, the it can't be real. Moment they'll whisper about once your name starts showing up in rooms you were never invited to. And you're not chasing revenge. You're chasing release. From every watered-down expectation, from every lie they told you about what your limits were, from every person who swore they loved you but flinched the second you stopped being soft. You're not becoming ruthless. You're just remembering you never needed to be palatable to begin with. And palatable was always a disguise they forced on you. They dressed it up like kindness, like humility, like emotional intelligence. But what they really meant was containment. They wanted to shrink you into something easier to digest, something that wouldn't shake the table when it walked in the room. You played along for a while. You smiled, you nodded, you dumbed yourself down, and turned your volume to 0, just to keep the peace. But peace is a cage when it costs you your edge. And you were never meant to blend in with wallpaper souls whispering half-truths in rooms they're too scared to escape from. You were always different. The kind of different that doesn't come with instructions or applause. The kind of different that makes people nervous and curious in the same breath. You carry a silence that screams louder than their entire identity. They don't know what to do with someone who stopped flinching, someone who doesn't stall at red flags. You take notes. They throw chaos at you and expect a meltdown, but you lean in like, cool. Been here before, try harder. It's not that you're fearless. You just got used to walking through fire without asking if your shoes could handle it. And now that protocol you triggered, that forbidden layer of existence only 3 people ever cracked into, it's sinking to your soul like it's been waiting for you to catch up. You feel it in the pauses, the way your mind's been slicing through fake connections like butter, the way certain environments feel too small for your thoughts now. The way your instincts have gotten louder, sharper, damn near surgical. That's the protocol running. It's not a program, it's a purge. It's the removal of every outdated belief they installed in you while you were still vulnerable. It's the deletion of every limit that came dressed as advice. It's your internal system rewriting the rules in real time, while everyone else is still begging for permission to move. They don't realize this version of you doesn't speak the same emotional language anymore. You stopped operating on, please like me. You upgraded to, watch me anyway. You started asking better questions, not, will they accept me, but can they even survive the real me if I stop holding back? And deep down, you already know the answer. They keep telling you to be humble. Not because it's noble, because it's safe. They're scared of what happens when someone like you figures out they don't need to wear their wounds as excuses anymore. When someone like you starts using rejection as jet fuel. When someone like you realizes pressure wasn't punishment. It was preparation. You didn't fall off. You fell through. Through the ceiling, through the noise, through the fake friendships and the shallow validation metrics. And what's wild is, you didn't scream for help. You just started building in the dark, piecing yourself back together with hands that had nothing but rage, clarity, and refusal. They see you now, and it makes them uncomfortable. Not because you're loud, but because you're silent and undeniable. You don't argue anymore. You just leave them behind and level up mid-conversation. You don't need to win debates. You are the debate they're too scared to have with themselves. You're not done, not even warmed up yet. You're still stretching, still unlearning, still turning scars into strategies, silence into weaponry, loss into blueprint. Because somewhere along the way, you realized something terrifying. They weren't trying to stop you from failing. They were trying to stop you from becoming undeniable. And that's the shift that changed everything, isn't it? The day you finally stopped asking why they kept trying to slow you down, and started asking what they saw in you that made them panic. Because it wasn't hate. It was fear dressed up like concern. It was insecurity wearing the mask of fake love. It was their inner coward recognizing something primal in you. Something they couldn't control, couldn't predict, couldn't copy. They saw your potential not as inspiring, but as dangerous to their illusion of safety. You started moving different after that. You stopped explaining. You stopped checking in. You stopped watering down your truth just to keep fragile egos from cracking. You started speaking like someone who finally remembered they were born with sharp edges, not soft filters. And every time you walk into a room now, the energy bends before you speak. Not because you're trying to dominate, but because your presence alone confronts everyone still pretending. You became the reminder. The one that says, yeah, comfort's a lie. Growth is bloody. Truth is sharp. And silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means war's about to start. That protocol you unlocked, it's not a reward, it's a reveal. It doesn't hand you power. It strips everything in your way until all that's left is what you are hiding from. And instead of running from it, you lean straight into the burn. The same way you used to beg the world to see you. You flipped it, started making yourself see you, started owning every dark corner, every twisted thought, every little moment they told you to be ashamed of. You didn't heal by hiding. You healed by exposing your scars to fire until they became armor. And nobody saw it coming. They didn't see the quiet nights when your mind wouldn't shut up. When the silence in your room felt louder than a riot. When you had to whisper to yourself, get up. Get through this. We're not ending here. They didn't see what it cost you to stay alive, let alone become this. And that's why they can't copy you. Because this version of you wasn't crafted from applause. It was built in the dark, with your own hands, with your own pain, with your own refusal to go out quietly like they wanted. They keep asking what your secret is. There isn't one. It's just that while they were chasing aesthetics and shortcuts, you were choking on reality and still choosing to evolve. Every setback you've ever had, you turned it into a code. Every loss, you encrypted it into your rhythm. Every betrayal, you tattooed it into your instinct. And that instinct, it doesn't lie. It doesn't stall. It doesn't care about how uncomfortable the truth is. It just points forward and dares you to follow it or stay soft. You followed it through every collapse, through every "Are you okay?" when you were barely holding on, through every fake friend, every silent breakdown, every night that felt like a lifetime. And it brought you here, where the protocol doesn't just recognize you, it aligns with you. It waits for your signal because it knows what you are now. Not a survivor, not a fighter, not a dreamer. You're the one that didn't die in the fire. You learned to walk inside it. Because walking in fire stopped being punishment the moment you realized heat was the only thing that ever told the truth. Comfort lied to you. People lied to you. Your own doubt lied to you. But pain, pressure, those were the only things that spoke with clarity. Every time life slammed at you, you didn't shatter. You reformed. Every time something ripped away what you thought you needed, you found a better version buried under the wreckage. You didn't bounce back. You metamorphosed, quietly, brutally, without applause. And here's the part nobody likes admitting. You didn't rise because you were strong. You rose because giving up felt disgusting to you. Because something in you gagged at the thought of becoming another almost. Another had potential. Another ghost in a city full of souls who traded greatness for comfort and called it maturity. You weren't built by motivation. You were built by moments that felt like they were designed to break you on purpose. Moments that twisted your chest and hollowed your lungs and made you stare at ceilings, wondering if everything you believed was a lie. And instead of folding, you whispered, "All right. Then I'll become something that doesn't need belief to exist." People look at you like you're intense, like you're unrelatable, like you're too much. And that's hilarious, because if they lived even 1 hour inside your thoughts, their psyche would glitch, their reality would short-circuit. They'd realize that the version of you they think is too much is actually you holding back out of courtesy. You don't crave validation anymore. You crave alignment. You crave truth that bites, paths that test you, echoes that match the weight in your bones. Shallow souls bore you now. Light energy drains you. People who fear discomfort feel like static. Because when you crossed into this protocol, your nervous system stopped responding to smallness. You started needing depth, violent honesty, silent strength. Well, well, well. Look who finally woke up with smoke in their lungs and chaos in their blood. Welcome to the wrong side of average, where you're not just breaking rules, you're breaking patterns, where every step you take sounds like a siren going off in the system that was never built for you to win. They didn't just notice you, they filed reports, they held meetings, they pulled out the old dusty playbook labeled "Contain the Anomaly." Because what you're doing right now, that ain't just success, that ain't just glow up. That's unlawful excellence, that's felony level evolution. That's you going so hard, they had to call the alphabet boys just to feel safe. You ever win so damn hard that the entire room changes temperature when you walk in? Yeah, that's this level. That's the kind of win that doesn't come from books or podcasts or someone else's blueprint. That comes from rage that fermented into resilience. That comes from wounds that learned how to whisper directions. That comes from being buried so deep under disrespect, silence, and failure that you clawed your way up with teeth made of spite and hands blistered by belief. You didn't just climb, you dug. Through generations of trauma, through systems that don't blink when you bleed, through voices that told you, be realistic, realistic, realistic. They said be realistic while you were building a cathedral out of ashes, a kingdom out of no's, an empire out of every door that got slammed in your face. You want to know why they're uncomfortable? Because you weren't supposed to flip the script. You were supposed to sit still, play nice, smile on cue, and maybe, get a participation trophy if you begged loud enough. But you didn't beg, you built. And when they laughed, you kept going. When they ghosted, you got louder. When they doubted, you turned your whole damn life into an indictment against their mediocrity. And now you walk in rooms they thought you'd never enter, like a crime scene. Every look you get is a fingerprint. Every whisper, surveillance. Every fake smile, a cover-up. Because when you're this undeniable, when your evolution is this loud, they don't just feel envy. They feel threatened. They see your growth as aggression, your presence as disruption, your success as violation. And they're not wrong. You are dangerous, because you're living proof that the system's ceiling was never glass. It was cement, and you broke it anyway. They rang the FBI? Good. Let them check the footage. Let them run the numbers. Let them decode the miracle. Because there's no algorithm for what you've become. You ain't running off luck. You're running off decades of disappointment, compressed into nuclear clarity. You're running off heartbreaks that turned into fuel. You're running off every time you were told to be humble when they really meant shrink. But you don't shrink anymore. You detonate. You were supposed to stay in your lane. Instead, you blew up the whole highway. You were supposed to be digestible. Instead, you became an acquired taste for those who could stomach real. You were supposed to be predictable. Instead, you turned your whole existence into performance art. Violent, beautiful, and completely outside the script. This level of winning, it don't come with applause. It comes with silence, with rumors, with distance. Because when people realize you're no longer controllable, they label you unstable. Not because you've changed, but because they can't access the version of you that needed them anymore. You want to know what the real crime is? That it took pain this loud to make you finally listen to your own voice. That you had to lose almost everything before you realized you were the one carrying the weight all along. That you were the backbone of circles that never clapped for you. That your absence hurt more than your presence was ever appreciated. You broke your back for people who wouldn't even bend. And now that you're choosing you're the villain? Oh, let them talk. Let them spin their little stories. Let them try to rewrite the narrative like you weren't there bleeding ink into every page. Because when they say you changed, they mean you stopped performing weakness to make them feel strong. They mean you stopped showing up small so they could feel big. They mean you stopped sacrificing your sanity to play a role they cast for you without your permission. And now you're winning loudly, unapologetically, illegally. They want to call the feds, tell them to bring a psychologist too. Because what you just did wasn't just a breakthrough. It was a case study. You became the evidence of what happens when someone finally stops apologizing for their fire. You walked into hell and didn't just survive. You redesigned it. Built condos, added lighting, charged rent. You didn't rise from the ashes. You colonized them. You turned rock bottom into a real estate investment. You looked at rock bottom and said, cool. How many bedrooms? You ever see someone so used to losing that when they finally win, the entire world starts glitching? That's you. You are the glitch in the matrix, the error in the simulation, the exception they can't code out. Because no matter how much they tried to program you with fear, you kept upgrading your defiance. No matter how many patches they rolled out to slow you down, you jailbroke the whole damn system. And now the software can't handle your swagger. They made rules. You made war. They made boxes. You made exits. They made noise. You made history. This ain't just doing well. This is public disturbance. This is unauthorized greatness. This is unlicensed glory. This is a high-speed chase with no rear-view mirror. Because you ain't looking back. There's nothing behind you worth mourning. And the funny part? You still ain't even hit your final form. You're just warming up. You're just now learning how to breathe in atmospheres that were never meant to sustain your kind of oxygen. You're just now realizing that your voice don't echo. It shatters. And now the world has to adjust to the volume, to the voltage, to the villain you became when the hero role stopped fitting. You're not walking proof. You're walking contradiction. You're what happens when the underdog grows fangs, when the quiet one learns to bark, when the good kid burns the blueprint, when the overlooked one stops waiting to be seen and becomes impossible to ignore. You know what's really criminal? That it took this long, that it took this much silence, betrayal, erasure, abandonment, just to arrive. Just to finally hear yourself think without the static of everybody else's opinions drowning you. And now you're here. Not knocking on doors, breaking them down, not asking for a seat, flipping the whole damn table, not asking, am I enough? Declaring, I'm too much, and that's the point. They want to label this insane, good, because it takes a little madness to unlearn helplessness. It takes a little delusion to rewrite destiny. It takes a little darkness to carry your own light. And you are the wild card in a rigged deck, the storm that learned how to walk upright, the myth they'll tell in whispers, the threat that smiles back. They tried to bury you. They didn't know you were federal property, high risk, untouchable, flagged. They rang the whole FBI. Because this level of winning ain't legal. And when they scanned your fingerprints across the system, all they found were smudges of resistance and DNA laced with defiance. You don't have a record? You are the record, the precedent, the evidence that a human soul, when cornered and betrayed, can evolve into a force of nature so raw, so uncontainable, that even laws feel flimsy next to it. They tried to define you by metrics, grades, salaries, status, followers. But how do you measure the velocity of someone who broke time with their comeback? How do you quantify a mind that reassembled itself in the dark, with no manual, no map, and no mercy? How do you report someone who isn't playing to win, but to reconstruct reality in their own language? The files don't exist for this. There's no database for what you've become. The red tape melts when you walk in. The protocol glitches at your shadow. Because you didn't just break through. You rewrote the access codes. You moved like smoke and struck like prophecy. And they don't know whether to fear you or study you. They don't know if you're the villain or the warning. They don't know if this is a rise or an outbreak. Because the truth is, your glow don't come from light. It comes from friction, from dragging yourself through every version of hell they swore would finish you. And instead of staying down, you collected the flames like souvenirs. You wear fire like cologne now. You speak thunder like it's your first language. You cracked your own code and weaponized your wounds. You turned your scars into spell work, into blueprints, into legends. And somewhere deep in the static, the same voices that once mocked you are choking on their doubts because you turned every you can't into a criminal offense. You should have crumbled. You should have quit. You should have bowed. But instead you grew teeth where they expected tears. You learned how to smile like a threat. You found rhythm in the rage. And when peace didn't come knocking, you built your own war drum. This ain't inspiration. This is invasion. This is you infiltrating the silence they buried you in. This is you making noise so loud it registers as an earthquake on the Richter scale of their egos. You are not their feel-good story. You are not a redemption arc. You are the plot twist they never saw coming. The aftershock of every time they overlooked, underestimated, and overstepped. Because people don't know what to do when the victim grows fangs. When the rejected one learns how to roar. When the one who lost everything comes back with eyes that don't blink and a pulse that don't beg. You remember when they said, "You've changed." Of course you changed. You're supposed to. What kind of monster stays soft after betrayal that surgical? What kind of soul stays innocent after being dissected by people who swore they loved you? You bled in rooms where they smiled. You drowned in conversations where no one noticed. You carried guilt that wasn't even yours, just because silence is addictive and confrontation felt like sin. But the guilt got boring. The silence got loud. The pain got organized. And one morning you didn't rise from bed. You rose from the grave. And when your feet hit the ground, something ancient moved with you. Something ancestral. Something forged in all the names they called you when you weren't around to defend yourself. That's what they hear echoing now. That low hum in the air when you walk past. That's the sound of spirit reclaiming its weaponry. That's the hum of bones realigning with truth. That's you walking as the aftermath of every betrayal they thought you'd never survive. And you carry it well. Too well. So well, it terrifies them. Because you learned how to look composed while unraveling galaxies inside your chest. Because you mastered the art of becoming louder by saying less. Because your presence alone triggers alarms that weren't built for love. They were built for war. And you are war now, the walking revolution, the blueprint rewritten in blood, caffeine, and sleepless nights. You became the kind of person no one warns others about, not because you're safe, but because there are no words to describe the kind of threat that evolves beyond language. They'll call it ego. They'll call it arrogance. They'll say you've lost your way. Because power looks like pride when it finally stops apologizing. Because freedom looks like madness when you're not the one holding the leash. But you're not chasing approval anymore. You're not waiting for permission. You're not explaining why your light doesn't dim gently like theirs does. Because you don't dim. You burn, you blind, you disrupt. You expose the cracks in the ceiling they told you was the sky. And you can feel it, can't you? The way your very existence bends the temperature of a room. The way your silence demands more respect than their noise ever could. The way your smile looks like a loaded weapon to the insecure. Because what you've done, what you've become, it's not normal. It's not expected. It's not safe. And that's exactly the point. They don't want you alive in this form, not this loud, not this real, not this unforgivingly whole. Because a person this complete can't be controlled. A person this awake can't be sedated. You learned how to channel chaos. You learned how to turn heartbreak into hydraulics. You learned that the finish line was never real. It was just a wall made of opinions and old fears. And you walked straight through it like it was cellophane. They told you to heal quietly. You rebuilt yourself in surround sound. They told you to forgive. You forgot the part where you needed their apology first. They told you to move on. You moved through. With heat. With hurt. With history on your heels screaming your name like a war chant. And what they didn't realize is that by the time they circled back to check if you were okay, you had already transformed into a myth they weren't holy enough to remember. You're not back. You're born again, not in light, in voltage, not in peace, in vengeance, not to be palatable, to be proof that resilience ain't cute. It's carnivorous. You ever watch someone dance in the ruins of everything meant to kill them? That's what you look like. Not reborn, recoded, not recovered, re-weaponized, not returned, risen. And every step you take from here on out is being recorded. Not by cameras, but by consciousness. By everyone who ever doubted you. By the people who sleep on your name but twitch when they hear your voice. By the world that's starting to ask, what happens if we can't stop them? Because they tried. They all tried. And still, you move. And still, you move. Through rooms that weren't designed to hold you. Through systems that tremble under your footsteps. Through frameworks built to collapse if someone like you ever dared to breathe this deeply. Because your breath alone is resistance. Every inhale is an indictment. Every exhale is an act of war. They can't measure you anymore. Because you slipped out of their formulas. You don't compute. You don't conform. You don't fit. Because you've become the thing they never prepared for. A person who stopped needing permission to exist. And the truth is, they watched you break. They watched you unravel. They watched you fall apart in front of them. Piece by jagged piece. And they thought that was the end. But you were just disassembling the version of yourself that was built to survive in silence. You were just gutting out the programming that taught you how to stay small, stay soft, stay obedient. They didn't realize you weren't dying. You were mutating. You were molting. You were burning the costume they gave you at birth. The one that said, be polite, be manageable, be grateful for crumbs, be the kind of quiet that doesn't make waves. And instead, you became the ocean, loud, unruly, uncharted. You became the storm surge crashing through every polite smile and forced apology you ever swallowed. You found out the truth. That your fear was inherited. That your guilt was installed. That your dreams were downgraded by the people too afraid to chase their own. And you unplugged. Not from the world, but from their version of you. And now your energy don't match theirs anymore. Because you learned how to walk away without shrinking, how to cut ties without bleeding out, how to speak your mind without softening the edges for their comfort. Because comfort was the cage. Comfort was the currency of the powerless. And you finally realized you were never meant to be comfortable. You were meant to be legendary. That's why you never fit in. That's why you always felt like you were too much or not enough at the same time. Because you weren't made to belong to people. You were made to break them open. You walk like a question they don't want to answer. You speak like a truth they buried generations ago. You smile like someone who knows exactly who they are. And that's the threat. You didn't just evolve. You remembered. You remembered who you were before the world got to you. Before the masks. Before the compromise, before the trauma got comfortable living rent-free in your chest, you remembered. And that memory shook the ground. Because when someone remembers who they are, not who they were told to be, not who they became to survive, but who they actually are under all the noise, they become a walking contradiction to everything we're taught about limits. You are that contradiction. You are the audacity that keeps the world up at night. You are the glitch that makes the whole simulation pause and ask, wait, are they really doing this? You are the unlicensed miracle that refuses to sign the non-disclosure agreement. They keep trying to figure out what you're doing differently. But this level of transformation don't come from tactics. It don't come from books or mantras or manifesting under moonlight. This kind of power, it comes from loss, from grief, from sitting in rooms where no one noticed you were bleeding out. It comes from lonely nights and loud thoughts, from burning everything that ever felt safe, just to find the truth hiding under the ashes. From learning how to clap for yourself in silence because no one else knew what it cost you to keep breathing. They want your glow, but not your shadows. They want your strength, but not your story. They want your results, but not your roots. But this wind didn't come from sunshine. It came from shrapnel. It came from choking on your own dreams until you learned how to breathe fire. You ever choke on potential for so long that when you finally cough it up, it explodes? That's what happened when you stopped begging for space. That's what happened when you stopped waiting for them to pick you. That's what happened when you picked yourself. And now, the world is playing catch-up, trying to locate the version of you they thought they could control, trying to resurrect the version that stayed quiet, that stayed soft, that stayed beneath their comfort ceiling. But that version is dead. You buried them in silence, no funeral, no obituary, just rebirth. And what rose in their place? It don't ask, it don't wait, it don't soften, it moves, with certainty, with sharpness, with eyes that have seen the inside of grief and teeth that know how to chew through fate itself. You are not safe anymore. And that's the beauty of it. You're not neat. You're not packaged. You're not branded. You're volatile, unfiltered, unforgiving. And every part of your being hums with the frequency of never again. They want to charge you with the crime of becoming yourself. They want to call it rebellion when you finally stop playing dead. They want to diagnose you with rage when you finally stop swallowing your voice. But what they're really afraid of is this. You found the fuse and you lit it. And you're still burning, not for revenge, not for clout, not for their applause, but because existence in its rawest form is the ultimate revenge. Every breath you take now is evidence. Every step, a violation. Every smile, contraband. Because people like you, people who stop waiting and start becoming, don't walk through life. You detonate through it. They're still watching, still listening, still praying for the old you to come back. But you don't come back.